Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel called zuzanareacts, where I learn all things power up with your help and I just share my Slovak Central European point of view. And today's video is a part 2 of the Ranveer and Abhijit show on the podcast on the current state of geopolitics. And before we get into the video,
please like this video and click on the subscribe button and turn on the notification. Thank you so much for your support.
So we're just gonna kick off where we stopped on the wars and why actually they are being led, and let's see what the next subject is.
In the movie Animal, when they introduce Bobby Deol into the movie, everyone's attention span spikes up again.
Okay.
Which is why I want to introduce China for the same reason.
All right.
China's the Bobby Deol of this podcast. Are you familiar with the Chad meme?
I am actually.
Okay. In meme culture, Chad is like a badass guy who just says it like it is. In a world with PR-trained content creators, we have one, Abhijit Chavda, who speaks his mind. There will be people who will disagree with you. There will be people who will point fingers. But the fact that you're able to talk in a state of flow and you're able to openly express all these points and you casually drop a lot of these bombs, like you just called India-Pakistan's rivalry a civil war situation.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And you just randomly drop these bombs in the middle of your thought essays. But I think that's why people gravitate towards your work. So we got to talk about the world's Bobby Deol from Animal, aka China.
China.
What's up?
What's up with China? I mean, yeah, Mr. Xi Jinping is sitting pretty as the emperor of the current dynasty. The current dynasty is the Chinese Communist Party. So in China, I mean, when historians talk about Chinese history, they talk about dynastic cycles. You have dynastic cycles everywhere in the world, but they talk about Chinese dynastic cycles. So you had various dynasties that rose and fell. Whenever a dynasty falls, it's typically because of a certain set of reasons. They call it the mandate of heaven. If you have the mandate of heaven, you stay in power. Once you lose the mandate of heaven, you fall from the grace of the gods and you lose power. The mandate of heaven is very simple: control. If you have the wherewithal to control your country and its people, you have the mandate of heaven. The moment you lose that, you're gone and your dynasty falls. So that's how empires rise and fall in China. And the current empire is the Chinese Communist Party. And they don't have hereditary emperors. They have emperors who are chosen by the current dispensation. So previously we had, who was it? We had Mr. Hu Jintao and then whoever it was. And then now we have Mr. Xi Jinping, who is the current emperor. And he has made himself essentially emperor for life, amended some of the rules and some of the constitution and all that. He's essentially an emperor for life. That's what one could say. As long as it lasts, he's emperor for life. As long as he lasts in power. So to stay in power, you have to be tough in China. And that's what Mr. Xi Jinping is doing. He is consolidating his power. He has got rid of all the opposition, even imaginary opposition to himself. Lots of people have disappeared. What happened to Mr. Alibaba, Mr. Jack Ma? Where is he? We don't know. What happened to certain generals? What happened to their foreign minister?
Okay, does anyone know where's Jack Ma? Like, what was happening? He was like also like very inspirational when he was talking about education and running business. He was really, I really rated that guy, as in like from his speeches and things that I've heard, he had said. I was actually thinking about it quite a lot. Like, I haven't heard much from him. Like, what happened to him? Any of you have any ideas? Pop them in the comments. Thank you.
Disappeared from public life. One hopes they are somewhere, whatever, right? So that's how it is in China. Chinese politics is really, really tough. Dog eat dog world. And wow. So China, as we know, is an aspiring superpower. They aspire to replace and displace the US as the preeminent global power by what, 2049, 2050, somewhere around that time. The 100th anniversary of the founding, not the founding, the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party taking over power in China, roughly around 2050. The date eludes me. My dear viewers can look it up for themselves, right? So that's what it is. So the Chinese have built up this mega economy through manufacturing. And this entire process was aided and abetted and midwifed by the US. And this is known history. Now there is this big rivalry between the Chinese and the Americans. The Americans have gone all out in recognizing China as their number one threat. And there's something called the Thucydides trap, which we'll not go into. But when we have an existing power, there's a rising power, they say that war is inevitable, which is a lesson that was drawn from the Peloponnesian War almost 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece. And the writer was Thucydides. Okay, digression. Okay, so that's what it is. So China is this big power, but now they are facing challenges. They're facing challenges from the demographic perspective, from the economic perspective. The economy is slowing down. It's no longer galloping forward at 10% a year or 10% plus a year. Their figures say that it's around 5% something per year. But one has to take their figures with a few grains of salt. And then there is the demographic challenge, which is even bigger. The Chinese population, the growth is slowing down. There's something called the TFR, total fertility rate. To sustain a population at the current population level, you need a TFR of 2.1 per woman, which means on average, every woman should produce 2.1 children on average. Obviously, nobody can produce 2.1 children, but on average, that should be the figure. If you fall below 2.1, your population is going to start declining. Not just that, it's going to start aging as well. Now, China has this weird system that they enforce for a long time, the one-child policy.
Of course, yeah.
Chinese society is so stunted and weird. Think about this. Every Chinese person, take any Chinese person, he or she doesn't have any siblings, no brother, no sister, no cousins, no aunts, no uncles, no nieces, no nephews. It is such a strange society. And because of the one-child policy, which has now been relaxed, but because of the policy, every family, every set of parents treats their children as their most valuable and precious possession in the world. And they don't want to risk anything with their career, their lives, anything, right? So it's very difficult to convince them to send the children in the army, in the military, especially on front lines. Very, very, that sort of thing. And the population is aging. Right now, the median age, the average age, I believe, is around 38 or something, if I'm not mistaken. By 2100, it could be in the 60s. The average age could be in the mid 60s. So imagine, and the population by 2100 is projected to be half of what it is today, about 700 million. Imagine a nation of 700 million people whose average age is 65. The average person on the streets or everywhere else is 65 years old. Who's gonna do everything? Okay, who's gonna provide the fighter pilots? Who's gonna provide the soldiers on the front lines? Who's gonna do all the science? Who's gonna do all the industry, all the workers, all the laborers? Who's gonna do that? Obviously, one could argue that artificial intelligence and robotics will solve the problems, but who knows? Come on, man, it's all far off. We don't have that today. So these are the demographic and other challenges China is facing. The economy isn't doing that well anymore. There are big bubbles. There's the property bubble. There's lots of other things and all. There are big challenges in the banking system. Lots of debt has been given out. There are lots of empty mega cities that have been built. No one's living there. Lots of problems. But the Chinese are optimistic. The Chinese Communist Party is optimistic and can take the nation forward. But we have these big, well-known problems out there. Then there is the...
Okay. One thing. Have you really... I haven't, because honestly, like countries like China or India, they feel like it's just so remote from our lives. Like we don't even care. I think I mentioned that before about neighboring countries, let alone different continents. It hasn't actually really occurred to me that what he had said, I think is right. When he said, like, can you imagine a country where you have like no kind of relations, like no bonds, like family, because you just have one child always. It's strange. It's really strange. And I wonder from a psychological point of view, actually, what that means and how that impacts, like the psychology of the nation. Very, very interesting observation.
Expansionist, hegemonic mindset of the Chinese Communist Party. They have territorial disputes with all of their neighbors. Name one neighbor that they don't have a territorial dispute with, and I'll wait. There's no one. Whether it's Japan, whether it's Taiwan, whether it is Kazakhstan, whether it is Russia, India, we all know, Bhutan, everybody, Afghanistan, they claim the Wakhan corridor. They had these territorial disputes with Russia, okay? The Ussuri River region. So it's in the Russian Far East and the Chinese Far North. So there were these clashes in 1969. The Ussuri River clashes. Hundreds of soldiers died on both sides. The two nations nearly went to war. The Russians had decided to nuke China. And it was the Americans under Nixon and Kissinger who threatened them with retaliation, and that's how China was saved. So there was this boundary dispute, large Ussuri River boundary dispute that was resolved in the early 2000s. Now the Chinese have published a map last year, 23, in which they've reopened the border dispute and claimed certain of these territories as their own, and they've also renamed certain regions in Russia to Chinese names. So the Chinese are playing the same old games they play with everybody, with Russia. Imagine this, today the world is looking at China and Russia as allies. I'll tell you what, they don't trust each other. The Russians do not trust China. They have Iskander ballistic missiles on the border pointed at Chinese targets, and there would be missiles aimed at Beijing as well, and vice versa. The Chinese will, I guarantee this, have missiles aimed at Moscow and other cities. Nuclear missiles, nuclear tip missiles. So that is the situation. It's a kind of uneasy modus vivendi, one could say, an uneasy arrangement that they have right now, but they do not trust each other. The number one threat to Russia is China. And that's why the Russians are happy about India's rise and happy about the fact that India is not buckling in and giving in to Chinese bullying and whatever attempts they're doing. So, and then the Chinese are playing games in the Indian subcontinent. They're trying to woo Bangladesh. It's not working a lot. They are trying to open ports in our neighboring country, Myanmar, Burma. Okay. So the Chinese are playing these games. They are trying to woo Nepal. Obviously, our wonderful government from the 1990s, whoever was in power then, they toppled the Hindu monarchy of Nepal, which was very pro-India. And they supported a civil war, a Maoist insurgency, Maoist civil war against the monarchy. The monarchy was toppled. We know what happened in the palace. Horrible story. And then the Maoists took over. And today, most of the politics, most of the dominant politicians in Nepal are pro-China and anti-India. Many of them, not all, many of them. And so that's the deal. So the Chinese are trying to influence Nepal into being more and more of a satellite of China. Then they are bullying Bhutan into ceding territory to the Chinese, and they will offer a negotiated settlement in which Bhutan has to kind of become more and more pro-China. Then the Chinese are trying to influence Afghanistan as well. We know the deal with Pakistan. The Chinese even have soldiers in Pakistan. In temporarily Pakistan occupied Kashmir. They're trying to woo Sri Lanka. They've done that. They imposed a debt trap on Sri Lanka when the Rajapaksas were in power. There is this dead port called Hambantota where nobody comes. There's an airport there that nobody flies to. The Chinese have built that and taken the money, and because the Sri Lankans were not able to repay the debt, the Chinese have taken that region, that land on a 99-year lease, and so on. There's the Maldives situation. There's a new Maldivian government in power, which is pro-China. And Mr. Modi, Prime Minister Modi, recently visited the Lakshadweep Islands, and he did not speak about Maldives at all.
Yeah.
And the Maldivians threw a hissy fit, various elements in the Maldivian government, and they criticized. They issued statements that were critical of Mr. Modi. For what reason? We have not spoken about you, but they went ahead and did that. And some of them even went ahead and put out various anti-India and anti-Indians kind of sentiments. And the Maldives tourism industry has taken a big hit because of that. And the bilateral relationship has kind of, obviously, there's going to be consequences to such actions when it comes from members of the government. So we have that. So the Maldives are kind of, the government is right now kind of pro-China. So the Chinese are playing these games. They have that Belt and Road Initiative, which was supposed to be the great vehicle that would propel China to superstardom, to superpower status. It's not working out. First of all, it's not, many nations are pulling out of it. Recently, Italy pulled out of it. Pulled out of the BRI. There's the Ukraine conflict going on, because of which the BRI infrastructure cannot be run through Ukraine. So it's kind of not working right now. I don't see it working in the long term. They also have the Maritime Silk Road. Even that is kind of dead in the water. These great Chinese initiatives and dreams are not quite fructifying. Obviously, they will try their best to revive this and make it work. They have what they call the string of pearls, which is a network infrastructure building spree to encircle India with Chinese ports, with Chinese assets in Pakistan, in Gwadar, in the Maldives, in Sri Lanka, in Burma, and so on. They also have a listening post in the Coco Islands, just north of the Andaman Nicobar Islands. They have a port in Djibouti, which they operate, and so on. So the Chinese are trying to encircle India at sea. They're trying to encircle India in the Himalayan region as well. So the Chinese games are continuing, right? But India is rising. And as long as India manages this situation and ensures that we don't get embroiled in a major conflict, military conflict with anyone next 20 years, they're going to be unstoppable. And the longer India goes and rises, see, India's growth is the largest in the world right now. India is the only economy in the entire world that is not under any threat whatsoever of a recession. And India is rising, it's growing at 6+, 7+% per year, depending on the quarter and all that. Sometime, hopefully, will exceed that. As India's economy keeps growing, and as your economy grows, your military might also grows. The longer it grows, the more difficult it is for China to tangle with India, because it is going to guarantee that they're going to get a bloody nose and they're going to lose some of their hard-gained assets and all that. So that's the situation right now. The Chinese are, they would like to rise, and they have these commentators on social media. Obviously, they have banned Twitter and Google and whatever, but they do use Twitter and all that. And Twitter somehow X allows Chinese diplomats to use the platform freely and all that. So there's a lot of Chinese propaganda out there. They portray the West as this evil hegemonic power, which I would not totally disagree with. I would actually mostly agree with that. We know the history. But they try to portray India as an accomplice and an accessory to what the West is doing. That's the kind of spin they are putting on India's foreign policy, which could not be further from the truth. And they said that India is anti-China because of the West. Excuse me, you are claiming our territory. You've gone to war with us at least twice, thrice. 62, we lost. 67, we beat China. 87, we beat China again. Nobody talks about these clashes. And the Chinese are claiming Arunachal Pradesh. They occupy Aksai Chin. They have their footprints over POK, and they are calling us the aggressor. So that's the spin the Chinese always put. So China is a problem for India. If the Chinese behave themselves, everything would be good, but it doesn't work. That's not been their attitude. So when it comes to the India-China issue, there's only one solution. The only long-term solution is that Tibet should be a free nation, and the Chinese involvement in Tibet should end. Now, there is no threat of that happening anytime soon. At least the next 20 years, Tibet is going to be under Chinese occupation. And we know they've changed the demographics in Tibet. The Tibetan people are now a minority in their own land.
Lovely.
So that's a situation, but the only way to ensure peace between India and China is for Tibet to be free. India and China have always had the best of relations, extremely friendly relations. India has been a net exporter of culture and civilization to China. What is the Chinese influence in India today? Nothing. What's the Indian influence in China? It's everywhere, all over the place, especially historically, right? So India has been a giver of culture and civilization and learning and wisdom and knowledge to China. And we have never attacked China. And not in 2000, how old is China? Let's say 3,000 years. Okay, let's say it's 3,500 years if you want to be nice to them. They have existed as a civilization for 3,500 years. We have existed forever. Not once have we had a conflict, India and China. It's only after they captured Tibet and we allowed that to happen. Mr. Nehru, the great, magnificent Mr. Nehru, made this happen. So it's only after the 1950s that India and China have had a temporarily shared border. And that's why
Could have just said it. The sarcasm is crazy. I love it.
we have two large powers. Obviously, there's going to be conflict if we have a shared border. So that's the situation. Long term, we need Tibet to be independent again. And that's the only way we can have peace between India and China. So China is a very big factor. It's going to be a very major power, at least till 2050, next 2-3 decades, definitely. But it's a power in decline. And so is the US, actually. And you spoke about Bangladesh. So Bangladesh and India, we have excellent relations in the past few years. The lady, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, she has, how many elections has she won? I think 3. And she's just won the 4th one just now. And the Americans wanted a regime change in Bangladesh. They wanted the opposition to come to power so that we can have 2 Pakistans on both sides. At least a nation that can act like another Pakistan on the other side. So when she was not in power, when the current opposition was in power, you had chaos on the India-Bangladesh shared border. You had, obviously we still have some of it now, but you had this rampant immigration into India, illegal immigration. You had these terrorist, insurgent, separatist groups which were given shelter in Bangladesh that were wreaking havoc in the northeast region of India, the far east of India, which everyone calls the northeast. And it was overall an anti-India regime that we had. After Mrs. Hasina came to power, the relations have improved significantly. There's a lot of bonhomie between the two nations. There's a lot of cooperation on so many different fronts. The incredibly convoluted border between India and Bangladesh with enclaves and exclaves and enclaves and exclaves within enclaves and exclaves, all that nonsense, it's been resolved mostly. So we have a tremendous amount of progress on that front. There are still certain things that obviously can be resolved and worked on in the future. But overall, the relationship between the two nations has been extremely robust the past several years because of the stability of government that we had, Sheikh Hasina and Mr. Modi. And now the Americans were saying that they were essentially pressurizing Mrs. Sheikh Hasina to demit office and to give in to the opposition. And the opposition had gone on this violent rampage in Bangladesh, and they were putting pressure through street power on the government to abdicate power. Well, the election results just came in last week, and she has won again. So it's a good step for the stability of the subcontinent, for the future of Bangladesh, because she has helped the economy grow a lot. And it's a great step forward for the continuing robustness of India-Bangladesh relations. So it's great. The Americans wanted a regime change. And after she won the elections, they put out a statement on their website, the State Department website, saying that this was not a free and fair election, but we will now move forward and work with the current government. So that's the kind of attitude they've had. When there is a regime change in Pakistan, when Imran Khan is thrown into jail and somebody else comes to power, we don't even know who that guy is, the Americans are fine with that. Oh yeah, great job. But when there's an election in Bangladesh, they're saying it's not free and fair. Double standards is the name of their game, which is why nobody respects them or trusts them anymore. That's the deal. So that's the thing about Bangladesh.
Okay. I still want to reverse you back into China a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
We spoke about 3 very important geopolitical events happening at the start of 2024, the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, the conflict in the Gulf, and then the African Niger coup that you spoke about at the start of this podcast, which kind of affects the geopolitical power that France holds in that belt. I remember in one of our older podcasts from last year or the year before that, you spoke about how we're probably heading into a 3-pronged world, like 3 different teams. Multipolar world.
Yeah.
One pole would be Russia and China. The other pole would be America, NATO, etc. And the third pole is possibly a collaboration between India and France. So I'm beginning a whole new chapter here, beginning with what China's possible viewpoint is on these 3 conflicts which are important right now. The Gulf conflict, the European conflict, and the African situation.
Right.
Okay. It would be strange to have India and what did he say? I felt like it was India and France, but like France is part of NATO, so which is a bit strange. But let's see what China's point of view on these conflicts and Abhijit's opinion is.
So the Chinese have significant interest in Africa. They want to use Africa as a place from which they get raw materials to fuel their economies. Copper, iron, coal, rare earth minerals, and so on and so forth. They want all that in raw form. They will then take to the country, process, and then turn into finished products. So Africa is just a place where they can get resources from. That's how they see Africa.
Modern day colonialism.
You could say that. But even the Europeans and the West is doing the same thing. Maybe even worse, in a much worse form perhaps. The Chinese view Africa as that. So there is this proxy conflict going on there between the East and the West. China and Russia on one side, and France and the US and whatever else on the other side. And then the unfortunate African nations and the people are caught in the crossfire in between, and their suffering is endless. That is the deal with Africa. Now, when it comes to the Middle East conflict, the Chinese obviously are taking the side of Gaza and the Palestinian people. And they even have this, like I said, the port in Djibouti, which is in the Horn of Africa, near the Strait of Bab al-Mandeb, between the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea, that region. They have a port there, and they have warships there. And they have been, doing these anti-piracy patrols. But when a ship is taken over by pirates, the Chinese just sit and watch. They refuse to heed the distress calls. They just sit and watch. And the Indians go in and rescue ships from pirates. That's the kind of role the Chinese are playing there. There's an element of mischief making there, an element of glee. That look at the misfortune that's befalling you. That's the role the Chinese are playing, which is no role at all. Just observers and not doing the duty as anti-piracy operatives. So that's the deal. So when it comes to the Middle East conflict, the Chinese are taking the side of the Hamas, the Hezbollah, because they have ties, like I said, big investments in Iran. The Chinese have also made huge trade deals with Saudi Arabia and probably even the UAE, because there's a lot of oil there, and they would like to enjoy that. They need that to fuel their economy. And the Saudis obviously are happy to do business with whoever is willing to buy their oil. So there is the element of that there. And the Saudis and the UAE are now part of BRICS. So is Ethiopia, which is, one could say, a relatively minor power comparatively. And there's Egypt, which is one of the major North African nations. And well, it's the bridge between Asia and Africa. India has excellent relations with Egypt. Now, we talk about China. So that's the Chinese angle in the Middle East region. They're anti-Israel, anti-West, pro-Iran, pro-Hezbollah, pro-Houthis, pro-Hamas. That's the deal. And they are not doing their duty as anti-piracy operators. They're just sitting and watching. That's the thing. When it comes to the war in Europe, the Ukraine conflict, the Chinese are on the side of Russia. So the Chinese covet the plentiful gas that can flow out of Russia. Russia is what we call an autarky. An autarky is a nation that has everything within its own territory. Doesn't need to import anything from anywhere. The Russians don't need to import iron ore. They don't need to import bauxite, the ore of coal. They don't need to import oil. They don't need to import gas. They don't petrochemicals, agriculture, everything they have. They don't need anything. So Russia is an autarky. China is not. So the Chinese would like to acquire this plentiful Russian hydrocarbons, gas, oil.
You know what just came to me, and I have to cut this here, is that, no wonder that the US is so afraid of Russia, because they have everything, self-sufficient, right? Dun, dun, dun.
All that, whatever other minerals, resources they have. And they would like to turn Russia into a client state, a vassal state. My favorite word, vassal. My viewers will know that. So they would like to turn Russia into a vassal state, and Russia needs a pressure release valve, which probably is India. If India can, to some extent, counterbalance China, it's good for Russia. So the Chinese are on the side of Ukraine. Chinese are on the side of Mr. Putin in the Ukraine war. They're anti-Zelensky. Zelensky is, well. So Ukraine is a proxy war between Russia and NATO. NATO is owned by the US. So the Americans wanted to turn this into a battleground and destroy Russia's fighting strength. Never happened. Instead of that, Ukraine got destroyed.
You know what? This is just so unacceptable to say in the West. Like, I still don't understand how these channels are not being banned for whatever is happening actually here. To say that. I mean, we all have our opinions, but to voice something like that is highly unacceptable in my end of the world.
And well, who knows how it goes on. One hopes the conflict ends sooner or later, because it's been terrible for the people of Ukraine. They've lost all their men. They've lost their young people. And so on. Yeah. So that's the Chinese involvement in Europe. They had lots of designs and great ambitions for Europe. They wanted to interlink Europe and Eurasia with China. Great infrastructure network, road, rail, all that, shipping. They even bought ports in various parts of the Mediterranean Sea, in Greece, in Israel, and so on. But India has also bought ports in these regions. So there's this thing also going on there. So that's the Chinese involvement in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Europe overall.
They're still the manufacturing hub of the world.
They still are, yes.
Making money there.
So yeah, so there is this initiative called China +1. So most of these nations that use China as a manufacturing hub are now diversifying their options. They want more options. So they want China. China is there, but they want China +1. So they're looking at one more nation from where they can source their manufacturing. That could be Vietnam, that could be Thailand, that could be India, that could be Bangladesh, whatever. Now, it's a great opportunity for these nations, especially for India, right? So we are taking certain initiatives in that direction. And obviously there's the Taiwan factor, which we have not spoken about. Taiwan is this big semiconductor manufacturing hub. TSMC, this major company which manufactures so much of the world's semiconductors, is based in Taiwan. The Americans have ensured that there is a new major mega plant of TSMC in Arizona. One more is coming up in Saxony, I believe, in Germany. So that will give them enough redundancy, because they own Germany. The Americans own Germany, by the way. So once that is done, once these two plants become fully operational, Taiwan loses whatever real importance it had. And then even if the Chinese try to invade it, the Americans can make sure that everything is destroyed, and Chinese inherit nothing but wasteland.
Okay, can I just say, when he slipped there, and I said it in many videos, that Germany is owned by the US, and it's true in a sense that obviously I really don't know the geopolitics. I know just the history of the world wars, and basically it was due to the US. The Germany is in fact where it is. Obviously, like, they have invested crazy money. There was hyperinflation in Germany, madness what was happening there, and clearly, obviously, like, Germans worked to become like the most powerful economy in Europe, but it would never, I think, have happened. Would it not be for the US money?
Yeah, I was watching a documentary about the current situation in Taiwan. This is an election year for them.
Yes,
The party in power is anti-China. The the opposition party is pro-China.
Mhm.
No one's able to predict who's going to be elected.
Yes.
Therefore, the citizens are in a state of turmoil. At least that's what was shown in the documentary. And this could totally be Western branding and PR, because it is media at the end of the day, and all media is twisted based on the emotion of human beings. But either way, what was shown in the documentary was that people in Taiwan are preparing for war. They're taking these classes for self-defense, and at least that's the message. I'm sure that represents a sliver of truth, if not the whole truth. At least, will we see another hot war-based conflict in that part of the world?
There's always the possibility over there. See, recently Mr. Xi went to the US. He met with Mr. Biden. And apparently Mr. Xi told Mr. Biden that Taiwan's reunification with China is inevitable. It's going to happen one way or the other. It could be peaceful reunification, which they actually apparently desire, or it could be reunification through other means, which obviously means an actual ballistic kinetic conflict. Let's look at the two scenarios. The Chinese have been squeezing Taiwan, so to say. See, the Taiwan Strait is a small, narrow channel, just like you could kind of compare it with the English Channel, the strait of water between British Islands and Europe, kind of like that, okay? And the Chinese have a mega navy, numerically the largest navy in the world. And they always, these days, they routinely conduct naval exercises all around Taiwan. They have fighter planes, fighter jets overfly Taiwan all the time, violate Taiwanese airspace and all that. It's become a routine matter now. So they can, if they want, launch an invasion. Obviously, the Taiwanese defenses are very well prepared, and the Chinese would have lots of casualties, and they would lose a lot of assets, and it's not easy. It's not as easy as it sounds. But what this does is it pressurizes the people of Taiwan. It puts them under the siege mentality. It lowers the morale of the people of Taiwan. It's always like constant pressure. Chinese military exercises, Chinese live firing exercises into Taiwanese waters, Chinese fighter planes overfly Taiwanese airspace, sometimes even the island sometimes. And there is this barrage of Chinese language propaganda aimed at the Taiwanese people. And there is this interconnectivity between the two economies as well now. You know, there are lots of Chinese companies in Taiwan, but the Taiwanese are employed by Chinese companies on the mainland and so on. So the Chinese are trying to, do it by other means, not through war. But at the end of the day, if all fails, they may possibly perhaps go to war if they calculate that the equations will work out in their favor. Obviously, the Americans would like to use that opportunity if the war actually happens to damage China as much as possible, but who knows? So I hope a hot war doesn't happen. The Chinese may be able to achieve their objectives without having to resort to war, but that is a long, small, drawn-out process.
Would you say that one of the ways to predict the future from a geopolitical perspective, even political perspective generally, is the policies put forward by governments that are in power? Fair to say?
Fair to say.
One, what would you say are the policies of the American government? Which brings me to the whole American election situation, because I don't know exactly how a presidential style system works in terms of policy.
Okay.
It's one guy and his team in power, and then the narrative about the deep state and all sure. But if Trump gets elected, or our boy, Mr. Vivek Ramaswamy gets elected, how much will that change American policy? Therefore, how much will that affect geopolitics? And then
I think he's already pulled out of the running.
Also, finally, like to head into our India chapter and Dr. Jaishankar and the Modi government policies. But me, from a policy perspective, also a bit of a narrative about America mainly, perhaps China, and then India.
Right. So when it comes to the US, they have this global domination. Their so-called rules-based world order, which is like the so-called international law, it's what dominates trade and behavior of nations and all that worldwide. They also have this extensive naval network and military bases all over the world. So that's how they dominate the system. The Chinese are trying to create their own system, maybe a parallel system, which is the bifurcation of the world order. The Chinese and the Russians together with Iran and certain other nations against the American system. And we are seeing the emergence of multipolarity, which is the global south, which is kind of led by India. We have ensured that the African Union becomes part of the G20, which is now G21, all that. So what's the deal with America and Taiwan and China? So the Americans, like I said, are making sure that they are moving TSMC to the US, to US soil and to German soil, which means they seem to be preparing for the possibility that the Chinese may invade Taiwan, in which case the Chinese should get nothing. And they will still have TSMC, which means that the semiconductor manufacturing, all that will continue on US and German soil. So they seem to be beginning to go towards the, let's say, mindset that an invasion of Taiwan may be inevitable, or maybe a non-military takeover of Taiwan by China may be inevitable. Maybe not today, maybe not in the next 3 years, maybe in the next 10 years. But that seems to be the direction in which the American thought process seems to be going. Now, like you said, that the geopolitical future of the world can kind of be gauged by the various policies that governments have and various powers have. Because you can take a certain set of policies and kind of extrapolate where it goes in the future. And that kind of tells you what their envisaged future world order is like. Right? So if you look at all that, you can see that the American footprint seems to be slowly shrinking away. Okay, they are not building so many more warships. If you look at their arms production, their production of ammunition, missiles, machine gun rounds and whatnot, it's kind of not where it should be for a global geopolitical power. The Russians produce way more arms and ammunition than the Americans. Maybe the quality may not be as good as the American quality, like they say, like the West likes to say. But quantity has a quality of its own, like Joseph Stalin said. And yeah. So that's the deal. So the American footprint over the world seems to be slowly shrinking. Obviously, one cannot take them lightly. They are the major power, second largest nuclear arsenal after Russia, but overall they have the biggest footprint all over the world in terms of military bases and ports and military presence, naval presence, all of that. America is still the largest power. It's kind of Rome in decline, kind of in the beginning phase of decline. And there is the cultural factor in the US. American exceptionalism is gone. They have opened the southern border. They last year, I don't know what the statistics are. If I may be wrong, don't quote me, but possibly over more than 300, possibly more than 3 million illegal immigrants were allowed into the US by the government, and they were relocated to various parts of the US. So that.
But we could debate why is that happening and why that actually. That's an interesting thing. I don't know if you guys are actually really aware why this is a policy. That someone else, like the previous president, was really strictly fighting for and against.
I mean, imagine, it's obviously illegal. It's illegal. You have to come through the proper process and through the proper channels. And if the government is allowing illegality, what does it mean? Corruption.
From the outside looking in, from a long-term.
Okay. There was just something I wanted to mention. It's just, every time, when it comes to the Americans and their I always think like you went around the world enslaved or cause harm in so many different parts of the world, and then you're asking people that want to come to the US, maybe because since it's supposed to be the greatest, which I don't believe it is, but it's just like, well, you caused the conflict, do something with the people. No, but what Americans do, they just go to the Middle East. The Middle East comes to the Europe, then we have a crisis of immigrants here. But Americans are never like, they're hands off. They're just like, well, they go around, cause all the conflicts, ruin people's lives, and then they're like, you know what, we're not accepting anyone in our own country. I'm like, F that, that's just so rude and so arrogant, pisses me off big time. Ran over, let's continue.
Perspective, and please, I would actually like for you to disagree with me when it comes to this, but I think you're going to agree with me. From the outside looking in, it seems like the way to fix America's future is to actually have a completely fresh perspective, ideally young perspective on leadership, which is not Biden or Trump. Trump is too chaotic. Again, we're generalizing a very large argument into one sentence, so I'm sure there are nuances which I don't want to get into. Biden's too old. As Indians, we get shown a lot of Vivek Ramaswamy, who seems like a very articulate, intense, perhaps controversial, strong-willed, but articulate guy who's also got a great education behind him. And somewhere as Indians, you can see certain layers of his Indianness. Maybe that's why we feel an affinity for him. And there's that other young girl, Latin American, I can't remember her name.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
AOC. These are the two names that pop out in terms of young leaders.
She is a disaster. Oh my God, she is an absolute disaster. Wow.
What do you think of this whole next phase of American politics?
Right. US politics is very interesting, really interesting. First, let's take a 10,000 mile meter or whatever, look at the US politics, the political system. It's a two-party system. You have the Democrats, you have the Republicans. A two-party system in a democracy is one step above a one-party state like China or North Korea. So it's not really democracy because these two parties, the Republicans and Democrats, they have the exact same foreign policy. Exact same foreign policy. Warmongers starting new wars. The Republicans will use bombers, strategic bombers that are completely black. The Democrats will use the same bombers painted in rainbow colors, but they're going to drop the same bombs on you. So they have the exact same foreign policy. Now we have Mr. Biden, who's currently the president. He clearly is not capable of running a country, to put it mildly. His vice president is Miss Kamala Harris. She doesn't have the mental mileage and bandwidth to run a country. So the question is, who is running the country? The country is running itself, is it? Somebody is running the country. Who is it? That's what they perhaps possibly call the deep state. The defense establishment, the foreign policy establishment, all that. The Pentagon and whoever is in there, this amorphous, fuzzy, obscure mass of individuals, and maybe whatever it is, right? So the nation doesn't really need a president to run itself. This is, by now, it should be clear. Now we have this new election coming up, end of this year, end of 20.
Wow. I mean, I love how he's bluntly put it out. You are not, I don't think, and for all of you watching me from the US or the UK, I don't think that this is just acceptable to say it this way. And it faces me how this video is still up on YouTube because you just cannot say these things out loud. And just the way he says that, it's hilarious. Oh my God.
Before, somewhere around that time, who are the big candidates? I think everybody would agree that Mr. Biden is doubtful. He's way too old to run for president again. Miss Kamala Harris would be not a great candidate. I think most people would agree because nobody would vote for her. So I expect that the Democrats will somehow or the other put up a new candidate, whoever that is. I doubt it's Miss Alexandria or Ocasio-Cortez. She is a lighter version of Miss Kamala Harris, in my opinion. I don't think it'll be her. So who will it be? I'm not really sure. But that's one side of the story. That's the Democrats. The other side, we have the Republicans. So the big heavyweight is Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump is the big guy. He's above 50% of the polls. So when it comes to the Republican voters, over 50% are supporting Mr. Trump. Then we have Nikki Haley, who has a reasonable amount of. She's number 3 or something. I'm not sure, whatever it is right now. We have Mr. Ron DeSantis. And like we said, we discussed, we have Mr. Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek Ramaswamy is the sharpest of the lot, the most articulate of the lot, the youngest of the lot. He has taken everybody down, including his own party people. Nikki Haley has openly called her corrupt, and he has shown how she is corrupt, and nobody can deny that. The only person he has steadfastly refused to criticize is Mr. Trump. So if you look at Mr. Ramaswamy, he's either angling for a vice presidential run along with Mr. Trump as the presidential candidate, or he is angling for a 2028 presidential run. He's putting in the groundwork right now because he's very young, he's rich, he's very articulate. He can destroy any opposition, he can destroy any reporter, any news media person, or any of the other candidates in running against him. So that's the deal with him. Now, when it comes to Mr. Ramaswamy, Vivek Ramaswamy, Indians love him, obviously, because he's Indian, right? He's Indian, he's Desi. And he's not a Christian convert, he's a Hindu. And he says he's proud to be Hindu. The question is America ready for a Hindu president or vice president? I think America is not ready for that. I don't think so. And even if, let's say he succeeds and becomes the vice president, or let's say even the president, will it change anything? It will change nothing. America's foreign policy doesn't ever change. It remains the same. When Mr. Trump was in power, he tried to change certain things. Did it work out? He wanted a wall between the US and Mexico. Where's the wall? He tried his best, but he was an outsider and they made him fail. They ensured none of his big initiatives even gets off the ground. He's an outsider. Now he may again become the presidential candidate for the Republicans, but let's see how far that goes. Similarly, Mr. Ramaswamy is not a politician. He's not a career politician. Okay, so he's also kind of an outsider, and he's an interesting outsider. So let's see what role he plays. He's kind of a cannonball running through the whole thing and taking down people. And let's see how far it goes. So that's how I see it. I don't see the US as a nation and as a society being ready for a Hindu president or vice president yet. If you are brown, it may work for you. Miss Kamala Harris is half Indian, half whatever she is, mixed race, but she's not Hindu, and she became she portrays herself as a black person, more or less, right? We had Tulsi Gabbard, who was there in the 2020 elections. She couldn't get far at all. They kind of kicked her off she was not even allowed to debate in the Republican primaries, if I am not mistaken. And Mr. Ramaswamy, he's doing well. He is, he's very impactful, but he's right now polling around 1 or 2%. That's not great polling figures, So yeah, it's challenging for him. I think he's looking at a long run kind of thing, a long-term kind of perspective. That's where I see it. Okay.
It's interesting because I would wonder for all of you that are watching me from the US, what do you reckon about what he has said? Like, if America is not ready for a Hindu, I don't really kind of understand the makeup of the American kind of society in that detail to gauge the feel for what it would be. I think, don't know. I'm actually curious because I would imagine that no one would care. There are a lot of Christians there, right? I think that they care about that as well. I'm just like, from watching trash TV, they all kind of family Christians and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of, but I would struggle to kind of understand the makeup of the society and the feel of what Americans would or would not do. But maybe they're not. But maybe he's right, because just recently been debating of how different it is for Americans, because Americans are just like, it's just one culture, right? In India, you guys have different states, everyone has different cultures, you have Christian, Muslim, and Americans were just like always Americans. Like, for example, when you go to Slovakia, you have like Hungarian ethnic group, you have Ukrainians, and you come through states through parts of Slovakia where multilingualism is just normal. So let's say southern part of Slovakia, you have the towns have, let's say, Slovak and Hungarian, what have you, right? So we are very much in Europe because it's like such a melting pot of different cultures. And it feels like India is the same. We are exposed to different ideas, different nations, and I think we're able to a bit more feel into, okay, I don't know, state of Gujarat is kind of, these are the kinds of people and these are kind of their beliefs, and Goa works different. And so it's the same here, right? Like, but we only go as far as that, just the neighboring countries, to be honest. Or, you know, like country you live for. So for example, I would have a sense of what Hungarians are like, what Polish are like, what Czechs are like. I actually don't have a sense of what Ukrainians are like. But then living in the UK, I have a sense of what the English are like. Because of that, I have some sort of sense of what French are like. But then, you know, like it comes to the countries of Benelux. So, you know, that kind of like between Germany and France. And that is like, for me, new territory. But yes, because you get a sense of and the feel of what the kind of neighboring countries like. Yes, you have idea what maybe Italians are like, Spanish are like, but no one has any idea what Portuguese are like, for example. So it's kind of an interesting. I would love to know for the American crowd here to let me know if you think that America is ready for Hindu. I just, it almost sounds like it's a bad thing, but you never know with the Americans which kind of discrimination direction they go into. So please do let me know.
Fair. And none of this matters from a geopolitical perspective.
No.
Geopolitics is going to keep going on. It's just going to carry forward from the momentum of everything that we've spoken about.
Yeah.
Any signing off notes, sir?
We have the Indian elections coming up.
Oh,
it's
damn.
It's a big event for India.
Let's cancel that any signing off notes question. Tell me, sir.
Yeah, so we have the Indian general elections coming up. Mr. Modi has been in power for 2 terms, and he has announced himself as the prime ministerial candidate from the BJP. And sometime this year, probably in the first half of this year, we will have the elections. Last time, 2019, the election results were announced in May, and the elections were held over March and April, roughly. And most likely, we're going to have the same sort of thing. Most likely, maybe a month or 2 here and there. So it's going to be announced pretty soon, I expect. We're already in January. We're going to have an announcement reasonably soon. The Election Commission will make the announcement. And then we're going to have the election campaigning cycle. It's the entire mood of the nation, the entire tempo, everything, the entire outlook, everything will change once the election campaigning cycle starts. So from where we are sitting, from how things have gone, obviously Mr. Modi has done a terrific job of taking the country forward. There's this tremendous vitality in the nation, this tremendous upsurge of self-confidence among Indians. The Indian economic growth is there for all to see. India's foreign policy is excellent. India is making inroads and excellent, robust relations with all kinds of countries, near and far. Great neighborhood policy, great extended neighborhood policy, great policy at counterbalancing the major powers in the world, and so on. So India is doing tremendously well. There is nothing I can fault the current government for. Obviously, there are certain irritants, certain problems. There is the extremely unfortunate situation in Manipur right now. Half of Manipur is under foreign occupation, whether people know it or not. And well, there's a geopolitical angle entirely there also. That is a whole different story. I'll not go into that. But yeah, that is something that's going to be resolved over time, and India will resolve it. But yeah, that's the situation. So we have all this going on. I mean, overall, it's a very positive story for India. India is doing very well. So from my perspective, I would like to see Mr. Modi come back to power. Call me whatever you want. Bhakt, Sangi, whatever. I don't care. That's what I am. I want Mr. Modi to come back to power, and I fully expect him to indeed come back to power. And I
think even Modi haters expect him to come back to power. That's the flavor of the nation.
I mean, that's just the way it is. Yeah, he has done such a tremendous job. His overall government has done so well. I mean, look at the number of airports we built. We have doubled the number of airports in the last 10 years. The number of new railway lines we're building up, the infrastructure we're building, the highways we are building. Look at the economic growth. We are coming up with a new semiconductor plant foundry in Gujarat. We are coming up with new ports in various parts of the country. There's a major transshipment port coming up in the Andamans. We are focusing on Lakshadweep for tourism. We have finally brought peace in Jammu and Kashmir. We have given the people of Ladakh their own due. I mean, overall, it's progress everywhere. If you look at the macro perspective, overall, the growth story is very, very impressive. Very few nations have been able to do such a thing in just 10 years. So
we have an identity on the world stage now.
We do. I mean, look at the last summit, the G20 summit. I mean, it was considered to be almost impossible to achieve consensus in the final declaration. And we pulled it off through tremendous diplomacy.
Generally, even when I travel in the country, just the flavor of the couple of decades that we've had, or the one decade that we've had till now,
yes,
is pretty pro-Modi.
Yes, I agree.
The question is who's going to succeed him. And I think we've discussed this in the past. It's between Nitin Gadkari, Yogi, and third name that come up.
Dr. Jaishankar, was it?
I believe so.
So let's take that up again. Look, the most important thing, the most vulnerable time for a nation is when there is a handover of power. Okay? That process, the succession process, is the most vulnerable time for a nation. There are so many, countless examples in history. If the succession goes wrong, whatever you've built up over the past 3 decades, 5 decades, whatever, it can dissipate itself. It can disappear in just a few years. Look at the USSR. Look at, so many examples. So the process of succession is critical for the political stability and continuity of a nation and everything else it has. So, so whoever is next has to take over from what Mr. Modi has been doing and take it further, amplify that, and go even further than what Mr. Modi has done. So Mr. Modi is laying a foundation, a base for the nation, and then we have to use it as a springboard and go forward. So we need the right leader for that. Who's the right leader is the question.
So AC, if someone held a gun to your head and said, pick one of these three.
Pick one, head with a gun to my head, I would say Yogi.
Yeah?
I'd say Yogi.
I'd probably say Nitin Gadkari, but that's because I've podcasted with him and I got to know the energy. Probably say Yogi.
Look, there has to be a certain amount of unpredictability, a certain amount of X factor, a certain amount of vitality, and from a leader's perspective. And the most important factor is the direct one-to-one connection with the man and woman and child on the street. You need that charisma. A leader, it is essential for a leader to have that. Mr. Modi has that. He's probably one of the most charismatic leaders in the world. When he speaks, it resonates with each individual. He's not speaking to a crowd. He's speaking to you. That's how it feels when you watch. And very few leaders have that. I believe Mr. Yogi has that. You can be a tremendous policy maker. You can be a tremendous executor on the roads. Whatever you've been told, you do it, and you do a brilliant job at that. But you may not be able to connect with the public, and that is the vital factor in a leader's popularity and longevity. The ability to connect one-to-one with each individual out there in the public, and very few leaders have that. Mr. Modi has that. Mr. Yogi also has that. I cannot see anybody else right now who has that. See, Dr. Jaishankar is a tremendous diplomat, probably the most impactful diplomat in the world today. That is his area of expertise, diplomacy. I believe, I may be wrong, but I think perhaps if you were to ask him, would you like to be Prime Minister? He would say, no, I would like to take India's foreign policy forward, because that is my core competence. And that's what I would like to leave a legacy behind.
Abhijit Chavda, another epic episode. This is the 2024 special. I'll see you in 6 months. I need some time to study and get back to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Awesome.
Thank you, sir. Had fun.
Okay, so this is it for the whole video. It's interesting when he was talking about charisma, and leadership has charisma, and something I've been actually recently studying with my course as well. But I think that, I don't know if I'm confusing it, but I'll just put it out there, and you can go and check on your own. I think I'll need to check after this, but it feels like charisma is linked with psychopathy, like that most successful people are actually psychopaths. So it's also interesting. I hear why we love charisma and all that kind of stuff, but honestly, I think. But now that I was thinking about it, I wonder if I'm not just mixing concepts together, but it borders with psychopathy. Not good, literally not good. But the second part of the video, I definitely did enjoy more. The previous one I mentioned that I almost fell asleep. I felt it was super boring, but it was actually way more, at least interesting for me from my perspective and for my learning. And you would have seen my opinions throughout the video. And it looks like the 2024 has just basically just begun and is going to see how things evolve. I think that the huge impact is going to be, obviously, who is going to be the president in the USA, and I guess the hope, at least for the Europeans, if let's say the Trump is going to win, is then he said that he's going to pretty much put an end to the war, and I think that the ones that are profiteering from that perhaps might not see it as a great one, but I haven't closely followed anything what's happening in the US for a while now. So I don't know what the moods are, like where the scale is going to tip. But I think that they have huge problems with election fraud, so whether they like to admit it or not. Like in the last elections, they were literally. This is what phases me, and I don't quite understand that state and how things work. And obviously, it's just an outsider looking in. It's just like when you have a footage, like a real ass footage from a polling station, and you see that at midnight someone pulls out like a big box of ballots, and it doesn't matter if it is for the person that won or the one that lost, right? But there clearly is a corruption, and then they declare that there has been no problems with their election. When you have lots of footage like that, it just stuns me. So. And then you have this country influencing how the entire planet Earth is actually being run. It's a bit scary. But very interesting insights, especially for me around China. I don't really know much about them. and how perhaps they're also, I never thought of them as a power that is declining, but maybe because the US is declining and has an impact on China. But very interesting. What did you guys think? What was your one key takeaway from this video? I'd love to know in the comments below. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching this podcast with me. If you did enjoy it, please give a thumbs up, share, like, and subscribe to this channel. And I'll see you in the next one. Until then, please do take care. I'm sending much love. Bye-bye.